Most of the NBA shows out there today are probably going to start talking about the Kings versus Warriors game. It was a great game, and it's been an easy best thing on television anytime these two teams, the Kings and the Warriors, are playing against each other. It's the rematch of last playoffs. The Kings, at several times during that series, seemed like they were going to take it. Warriors fought back and really gutted out the 7-game series victory. And it just got pushed towards, well, the Kings are just 1 year away. That's sort of the narrative. The Kings young, they're on the come up, but the Warriors were still able to get this one. It's still the Warriors' time, and then of course the Warriors got knocked off by the Lakers. But what I want to start off with is the impending disaster that's happening in Minnesota. And at this point, I'm really the only one calling out the Timberwolves as being a disaster. I'm one of the earlier ones. No one else is going to say this, but it's a disaster. This Timberwolves team, which I talk about continually, they're still the 1 seed in the West. Technically, yes, they're by a half game ahead of the Thunder because the Timberwolves won last night. But time and time again, we see that when it gets into crunch time, their number one player, Anthony Edwards, has been terrible. Absolutely terrible. They won the game last night against Brooklyn, but it wasn't because they executed well down the stretch whatsoever. They were really horrendous. Mikal Bridges for Brooklyn was at the foul line with a chance to make 2 foul shots and tie the game. He missed the first one, and then at that point you knew with 2 or 3 seconds left, the game was already over. But the Timberwolves were super fortunate that he missed that foul shot. Anthony Edwards was non-existent down the stretch. He airballed a 3, he missed a shot from the foul line, and he was super, super passive. When you get compared to Michael Jordan, one thing that you wouldn't expect is that in the end of a close ball game, you're going to get hit with passivity. There are some sports, fighting sports, where there are rules against passivity, where the referees will urge you to fight when you're fighting too passively, when there's not enough action. Anthony Edwards isn't really the guy that you would ever think. This Jordan-like character, you think that at the end of the game, that's his time. In the small sample size that we've seen of him during the playoffs, he's been the type of guy who seems to want the ball, who wants the shot in that situation. But last night, and throughout probably the last 10 games that they've played, he doesn't seem to want the ball at the end. The team's message and mindset is convoluted between him and Karl Anthony Towns, something that we thought they fixed. Chris Finch, their head coach, sees, as they're coming down the stretch, he sees what's happening. He sees that his team is losing a grip on the game. What was an 8 to 12 point lead is now a 5-point lead. And he keeps trying to call timeouts to stifle the Brooklyn Nets' run in stealing this game from them. So he did the right thing from his perspective in terms of the timeouts, but why is his team not executing like they should be? There were also several entry passes that they threw for Gobert, where Gobert has position on whoever's defending him, and they just do that nice little lob up just so that Gobert can catch the ball. And then once he catches the ball, he's going to either pass out or he's going to turn and try to put up a little shot. But they couldn't even get that entry pass into him. Several times they threw that pass, and it was thrown too hard, too high for Rudy Gobert, and the ball went out of bounds. That was a whole bunch of the turnovers they had at the end of the game. And Naz Reid isn't playing well anymore either. Throughout the whole resurgence of this Timberwolves team, Naz Reid was playing great. And the talk of the town was, wow, Naz Reid can fill in and do seemingly everything. He hits the three-pointer. He does everything that Cat does on a smaller scale. And now Karl Anthony Towns is dispensable. But now, when they come down the stretch of close games, Karl Anthony Towns is a disaster, as he always has been at the end of close games. Anthony Edwards hasn't looked like the guy that we've seen in the playoffs last year. Naz Reid isn't playing well. They can't get the entry pass into Gobert. What's going on with this team? And I'm one of the early dissenters from this Timberwolves team. I've seen it happening, and it really could have been magnified had they blown that game to Brooklyn last night, which they probably should have, or at the very least, the game could have gone into overtime. But they got spared because the Nets have a lot of struggles, and Mikal Bridges missed the foul shot last night. But had they lost that game, I think a lot more people would be ragging on them the way I am. I'm still doing it anyway because I see the writing on the wall. I see the way they play in close games, and I see the way they play in the final 4 minutes of the game. I see the way they can't execute. I see how Anthony Edwards isn't seeming to be the player that everyone thought he was ready to be. And I see that Karl Anthony Towns hasn't really accepted his role of being the second player on this team. He still wants to be the first player. So I'm out on this team. They're first place in the West, and I don't think that they have a shot to win the NBA championship this year whatsoever. If I had to make a list, there would probably be between 4 and 6 teams in the league, and I'll do this in another podcast, that can actually win the NBA championship, that have a real shot to win it. And Timberwolves are not going to be on that list. I can say right now definitively, sitting here in January, that they don't have a shot. They're not that team. They're not that team yet. They have too many problems coming down the stretch, and they have too many problems with the way their team is laid out. They won their last 2 games against bad teams, the Wizards and the Brooklyn Nets. They're 32-13. They win over 71% of their games. And I'm here to tell you that they have no shot to win this thing. In the beginning of a regular season, the first 30, 40 games or so, there's usually 1 or 2 teams in each conference who play surprisingly well. And in the Eastern Conference, I think that surprise was Orlando. Orlando, stereotypical, quick out-of-the-gate team. Young, they win a lot of ball games early on in the year, and then it starts to simmer down as the season goes on. Suddenly, a lot of those games that they were winning with good hustle, good defense, and some late-game heroics from Banchero, suddenly it's not happening anymore. There are other teams that want it more than them. There are other teams that are more ready for it than them when it comes down the stretch of the season. And the Magic are going to revert back, and maybe they'll be a low playoff seed, and maybe they'll be a play-in team. And in the Western Conference, you kind of have that with the Utah Jazz, sitting at 500. They're definitely in the race to be a play-in team. But I think what you really have it with is the Timberwolves. You just have it at an even better scale because the Timberwolves are literally in first place. But mark my words, they're done. Minnesota's toast. And little by little, everyone else is going to come around to see that. But it's not indicative of their record. It's indicative of the way they play in the end of close games. And there's nothing more important for an NBA team than how do you play in the last 3 to 4 minutes of a game when the game is on the line. You also have the Philadelphia 76ers, fresh off of Joel Embiid scoring 70 points in a ball game. People hailing him as he's going to be the MVP again. He's going to win it again. He's going to win it 2 years in a row. He's going to be etched in history as this great modern-day NBA center, a great scorer. And then they go out and they lose to the Pacers. Not only do they lose to the Pacers, they lose to the Pacers who were missing Tyrese Haliburton, their best player, who got announced last night that he's starting in the All-Star game at point guard. The Sixers losing to the Pacers when Tyrese Haliburton's not playing, that's the equivalent of the Pacers beating the Sixers when Joel Embiid is not playing. Tyrese is their best player. Tyrese is the Pacers' #1 player, and it's not even close. Him not playing in the game and the Sixers still losing to them is a bad loss. So Joel Embiid can take the 70 points. And I don't know where he can go with it. Because, yeah, you can be the MVP, but this is not a game that you should really be losing if you are the MVP. You shouldn't be losing to an average team that's missing their best player. And then we can turn our attention to the actual Kings-Warriors game, which, like I said earlier, it's just must-watch TV. Because no matter how poorly the Warriors are playing, and no matter how poorly the Kings are playing, and no matter how up and down the season's been for both of those teams, for the Warriors has been even worse than the Kings, when these two teams match up, it's just magical. Because they have a chaotic style that they play when they're against one another. And the Warriors, with Steph Curry still at the advanced age of Curry, getting up there, not really in what you would consider to be his prime, probably at the tail end of it, he's still the best show in basketball with what he can do. Super, super entertaining. The crowd loves him. And then on the other side, you have the Kings. And for some reason, when the Kings play the Warriors, they're just in the zone. They seem so at home in the chaos. De'Aaron Fox just walks casually up to the three-point line and hits shots at pivotal points of the game that should be extremely nerve-wracking, extremely intense, and he's just so calm about it. And it seems like when the Kings play the Warriors, every time there's just a different player who jumps up and has a great game. Last night it was Harrison Barnes. Sometimes it's Kevin Huerter. Sometimes it's Keegan Murray. Sometimes it's Davion Mitchell. Of course, sometimes it could be Malik Monk. But it's always somebody. And it's just absolutely gutting for the Warriors, where they were hoping to string a bunch of wins together, and then Curry's not able to get off the final shot. Good defense from the Kings in that final possession, but Warriors losing 134-133 to the Kings last night. And that's going to keep the Warriors in fourth from the bottom. The only teams that the Warriors are ahead of are the Spurs, the Trailblazers, and the Grizzlies. And they're only 3 games ahead of the Grizzlies. The Grizzlies don't even have a team to put on the court. They're missing all of their best players. The Warriors are 2 games behind the Jazz and a half game behind the Rockets. And those two, that's just getting ahead of those two teams just to get to 10. The Warriors might be able to get there to 10, but this is a nightmare. And for all of the sports talk shows that are talking about, well, who are the Warriors going to trade? And anyone who mentions a Steph Curry trade or a Klay Thompson trade or a Draymond Green trade, just stop. I'm going to break the news to you. The Warriors are never trading any of those players. They're not trading Curry ever. They won't trade Thompson, and they won't trade Green. Draymond Green is so pivotal and so important to this team. He brings the ball up and sets up the play. Curry defers the ball to him a large percentage of the time, even in the final minutes of the game. And Klay Thompson means a ton to the Warriors, and he doesn't really mean much to anybody else, because if Klay isn't playing like the Klay of old, why does anybody else want him? What's going to happen with Klay is that he's going to finish out his contract, and the Warriors are going to bring him back for a lower number, because why would Klay want to go anywhere else? As an older player coming off of injuries, not being the same guy, he still is important to the Warriors. He's not what he used to be, but he's still important to them, and he's not important to any other team. What's any other team going to do with him? Is he going to teach someone else how to shoot a three-pointer? Can't be done. Klay Thompson is not this guy who's going to go out and teach all your younger players how to play. Klay is a guy who has a very relaxed and carefree mentality. He goes out and he does his thing and he brings it and he's a dog. He's not a guy to coddle your rookies and teach them how to play the game of basketball. They don't even teach their own rookies how to play basketball. I mean, you've got players like Kuminga who've been trying to be developed by this team for a long time. You have James Wiseman who couldn't be developed by them and they had to get rid of him. You've had a lot of rookies in the last several seasons that the Warriors have drafted, and where are they now? Currently, they're playing Pajemski and Trace Jackson Davis quite a bit, but you've seen the Warriors draft a lot of guys in that late 30 slot where they usually are. End of the first round. The only player that they've been successful with drafting was Jordan Poole, but just because he's a completely unique guy, a completely unique scorer. And it worked out for them when they won their first championship, but then they had to get rid of him. The Warriors aren't trading any of these guys. They all mean too much to the team. And none of these other NBA shows out there should be convincing themselves that this is even a possibility. And I'll tell you, there's another thing that most, or at least everyone's going to convince themselves of this. And I told you in the last pod that this just isn't going to happen. Last night, there were a ton of blowouts. Pacers beat the Sixers easily. Jazz crushed the Wizards. The Knicks absolutely destroyed the Nuggets. And the Celtics beat the Heat by 33 points. And I heard it on the Bill Simmons podcast today already. Rob Mahoney is already saying this Heat team is worse than last year's Heat team. And I'm not sure that, he's saying the roster is a little worse and I'm not sure that this Heat team will be able to do it like last year's Heat team. You already have the narrative going around that the Heat, because you watch loss after loss after loss after loss. You watch a win, a loss, a win, a loss. Totally unpredictable. But it doesn't matter. They will be there. The Heat will be there come playoff time. And they will be a different team. You can't take any of these games seriously. The Heat are going to be there. And don't watch them play and watch Rozier have a bad game and watch Caleb Martin have a bad game and watch Duncan Robinson have a bad game and watch Jimmy Butler and say, what's Jimmy doing? And watch Bam and miss a bunch of easy floaters. Watch Tyler Hero dribble it around and pass it off and get it back and then take a deep three. Don't worry about it because this is not the team that's going to be there in the playoffs. Sometimes you just know. And they did it last year. They already showed us who they are. They're going to do it again. I'm not saying that they're going to win the NBA championship or make it to the NBA championship, but they're one of the few teams who can. And they're going to give it a good run. Whether they beat teams like Milwaukee and Boston, I can't say for sure, but I'll tell you this much. I would favor Miami to beat Philly if they played them in a playoff series. I would still give the edge to Miami. I would still give Miami the edge if they faced the Knicks in the playoffs, like they did last year. And if Miami had to face off against Giannis and the Bucks again, or if they had to face off against Boston, I think it's going to be a hell of a series. So I know it's hard as you watch every game. If you're an avid NBA fan, you're going to be watching every Heat game and you're going to say, how does it make sense? You look at the box score every single night. You go, how are they losing this game? How are they losing this game? How are they getting crushed? How are they getting killed on their home floor? They can't do it again. They can't do it again in the playoffs. It's just not possible. This team is maybe even worse than last year's team. They will be there. Trust me, the Heat will be there and they'll be ready to do it again. Coming up tonight, January 26th, on a Friday, we have the Suns, the NBA's hottest team with 7 straight victories. They're going to play the Pacers. Maybe Tyrese Haliburton will be back. Who knows? You have the Mavericks playing the Hawks. Luka Doncic, Trae Young showdown. Trae Young has been hurt, so we'll see if he plays tonight against the Mavericks. Otherwise, it could be a pretty easy game for the Mavericks to win. You have the Rockets going against the Hornets. The Clippers are going to face the Raptors. Thunder against the Pelicans. Magic against the Grizzlies. A lot of games that really aren't too riveting, but you get another rematch of the Cavaliers versus the Bucks. The Cavaliers had won 8 games in a row, and then the Bucks snapped that. And the Bucks have won 3 in a row now. So we're going to see, this is the rematch. Can the Cavaliers, who now go to Milwaukee, and get revenge on the Bucks? Should be a good one. And then you have the Trailblazers at the Spurs. So really the games that are going to be fun to watch tonight are going to be the Phoenix Suns against the Indiana Pacers. You're going to get to watch the Suns go on the road with their big 3. Can they get their 8th victory in a row? The Thunder game against the Pelicans could be a good one in New Orleans. Pelicans are still playing pretty well. And then the Cavaliers versus the Bucks. You can follow the show on social at NBAV on Twitter. NB stands for NBA Avenue. That's NBAVE. And you can follow the show on Facebook. We're on Apple Podcasts. We're on Spotify. We're on iHeartRadio, Google Podcast, Amazon Podcast. So you can find us everywhere. And we have the website that I'll be putting up soon. It's almost finished with in development, and we're going to get that up there for you guys. And for now, everyone have a great weekend, and we will catch you on the next one.